You think you know the person sleeping next to you every night. You trust them. You build a life together. And then, one day, a single piece of paper shatters everything. A hotel receipt. A name you don't recognize. A lie that's been unfolding for over a year. I thought I was just a hard-working husband. Turns out I was the fool in someone else's game. But here's the thing about betrayal, it creates a man with nothing left to lose. And that's when the real story begins. There was a time when coming home felt like a relief, like stepping into a safe haven after a long day. But that night something felt wrong. I had just finished a brutal 14-hour shift at the construction site, my body aching from exhaustion, my mind foggy from overwork. All I wanted was a hot shower, a decent meal, and the familiar comfort of my wife's presence. Instead, I walked into a dark, empty house. Frowning, I dropped my bag by the door and switched on the lights. "Maggie," I called, expecting to hear her voice from the kitchen or the bedroom. Silence. Pulling out my phone, I checked for messages. A single text, received hours ago. "Girls' night out. Don't wait up. XO." My jaw tightened as I reread the message. A night out? On a Tuesday. That made 3 in the past month. Since when did she have such an active social life? Shaking off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine, I tossed my phone onto the kitchen counter and grabbed a beer from the fridge. It was probably nothing. She deserved to go out to have fun. Just because I worked long shifts didn't mean she had to sit at home waiting for me. Still, something felt off. As the days passed, that feeling only grew stronger. It started with little things. Maggie being distracted, spending more time on her phone, disappearing for hours without a clear explanation. When we were together, she seemed distant. Conversations became shorter. Smiles felt forced. I wasn't the jealous type. I never had a reason to be. We'd been married for almost 9 years, and not once had I doubted her loyalty. But now, doubts whispered in the back of my mind, refusing to be ignored. One evening, after another long shift, I arrived home to find her in the bedroom, hurriedly putting her phone down as I walked in. "Who was that?" I asked casually, kicking off my boots. "Oh, just Ashley," she replied too quickly, her eyes flicking away. Something in her tone didn't sit right. I didn't push, but the unease settled deeper. Then I found the receipt. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was cleaning out my truck, getting things ready for a fishing trip with my buddy, Jake. As I reached under the passenger seat, my fingers brushed against something crumpled. Curious, I pulled it out and smoothed it flat. A receipt from a hotel, dated 3 weeks ago. The same weekend Maggie had told me she was visiting her sister in the next town over. I stared at the slip of paper, my stomach twisting into knots. The amount charged wasn't for a simple meal or a drink at the bar. It was for a full weekend stay at the Riverside Inn Suites. For a long moment, I just stood there, holding the damning piece of paper, my brain refusing to accept what it meant. Then reality set in. I had been played. The exhaustion, the long hours, the stress. I had chalked up her distance to all those things. But now I knew better. This wasn't about me being overworked. It wasn't about her needing space. Something was going on, and I needed to find out the truth. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to Maggie's steady breathing beside me, my mind racing. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe, no, the evidence was right in my hands. I had a choice. Confront her immediately or gather more proof before making my move. I turned onto my side, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I got them. I told myself I wasn't going to jump to conclusions, that I was being paranoid, that there had to be a reasonable explanation. But deep down I knew. The doubt had already taken root, and there was no shaking it. After finding the hotel receipt, I started paying closer attention. I noted the little things I'd previously brushed off. The way Maggie would get a text and subtly angle her phone away. The sudden weekend trips to see her family. The way she'd been dressing up more often when she went out. Still, suspicions weren't proof. If I was going to confront her, I needed solid evidence. So I did what any rational man in my position would do. I called Jake. "Man, I need your help," I said, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. He hesitated. "What's going on?" I exhaled sharply. "Maggie's been acting different. I found something, a hotel receipt. From a weekend she told me she was out of town." A long pause. Then, "Damn. Yeah." Jake was good with tech. Better than me, at least. And right now, I needed that expertise. "You want to track her?" he asked, his tone cautious. I ran a hand through my hair. "I don't know. It feels wrong." "Then don't," he said simply. "But if she's lying to you, you have a right to know." That was all the push I needed. Later that night, while Maggie was in the shower, I took her phone. My hands weren't shaking, not yet. I knew her passcode. 8 years of marriage and you pick up on things. A few taps and it was done. Jake had walked me through installing the app earlier that day. Nothing too invasive, just enough to log location history and call records. If there was nothing to find, I'd delete it and pretend this never happened. But if there was, I wasn't ready for that thought yet. The next few days felt like a slow, torturous wait. I kept my routine the same, woke up, went to work, came home. Acted like everything was normal. But every night I checked the data. First it was nothing. Then one evening a familiar address popped up.
Riverside in Suites.
Again. My stomach turned as I stared at the screen. She wasn't even being careful. My heart pounded as I clicked through her recent calls. The same unknown number, appearing over and over. Sometimes late at night. Sometimes in the middle of the day. I felt sick. I told myself I had to be sure. One last step. Jake helped me find an online database for reverse phone lookups. I punched in the number, my breath shallow. The name appeared instantly. Eric Dawson. I had no idea who the hell he was, but I was about to find out. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying every moment of the past year, looking for signs I might have missed. Had it been going on that long? Was it new? Was it serious? And more importantly, who was he to her? The next day, Maggie left early, claiming she had a meeting with a client. I told her to have a good day, kissed her on the cheek like nothing was wrong, then followed her as soon as she was out of sight. I kept my distance, my pulse hammering as I trailed behind. She drove straight to the hotel, parked, walked inside without hesitation, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb. I didn't go in. Not yet. I wasn't ready to see it with my own eyes. But now there was no denying it. She was cheating on me, and I was done pretending otherwise. That I sat in my truck outside the hotel for what felt like hours, watching the entrance, waiting for something, though I wasn't sure what. Maybe I expected to see her walk out, laughing, fixing her hair, full of whatever thrill she got from sneaking around. Maybe I thought I'd feel anger so strong it would push me inside to confront her. But none of that happened. The truth had already sunk in, as heavy as a stone in my gut. There was nothing left to question. By the time I drove home, my mind was on autopilot. The house didn't feel like home anymore, just walls filled with memories that suddenly felt tainted. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, letting the weight of it all settle in. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It had been a year of deception, an entire life built on lies. I had been the fool in this story, coming home every night, trusting, believing. I needed to act, but not in anger. Not in a way that would give her an excuse, an escape. That night, while she slept, I took her phone. The passcode had never changed. A few taps and everything was there. Texts, locations, call logs. The truth laid out in messages filled with affection that had never been meant for me. Her words, her confessions of love, her promises of stolen weekends. Each one another nail in the coffin of whatever I had once believed we had. By morning, I had the evidence saved. It felt wrong to even hold on to it, but proof was necessary. Confrontation was coming. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to work. I came home. I existed in a version of my life that no longer felt real. She went about her days as if nothing had changed. glancing at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, slipping away for hours with another excuse. I knew exactly where she was going. I knew exactly who she was meeting. I let it play out until I was ready. When the evening finally came, I was waiting for her. I had rehearsed what I would say, prepared for every possible excuse, but in the end, words felt useless. I didn't need explanations, and I didn't want apologies. The evidence was laid out on the table before she even sat down. The weight of it was enough. There was no need for shouting, no need for accusations. The truth spoke for itself. The hotel receipts, the messages, the undeniable, unavoidable proof. She didn't deny it. Excuses came: discontent, loneliness, the feeling of being neglected. All the reasons she had convinced herself made it acceptable. None of it mattered. The betrayal had already happened, and nothing she said would erase it. Her voice wavered when she admitted it wasn't just a mistake, that it had been real, that it had meant something to her. A year of deception wasn't an accident. She had made a choice, and now so would I. The separation papers were already drawn up. The decision had already been made. She packed a bag that night. By morning, she was gone. And with her, the life I had thought was real. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For the first time in years, I woke up alone. No sound of movement in the next room. No faint hum of a shower running. Just silence. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like the final confirmation that everything had changed. Her side of the closet was empty. The drawers where she kept her things were bare. The only trace left behind was the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the sheets. I forced myself to get up, to go through the motions of the day as if nothing was different. Breakfast, coffee, work. But it was different. Everything was different. At work, I moved through tasks mechanically, nodding when necessary, speaking only when required. Colleagues noticed, though no one said anything. They knew better. When I got home, I poured myself a drink, sat in the living room, and stared at the walls. The house felt too big, too empty, too quiet. A message came in. Jake. He asked if I was holding up, if I needed anything. I typed a response, "I'm fine," but didn't send it, because it wasn't true. I had spent the past few weeks preparing for this, gathering proof, forcing myself to accept the reality of the situation. But now that it was done, now that she was gone, I felt unmoored. It wasn't sadness. Not really. The anger had burned too hot for too long to leave room for that. It was something else. Something heavier. Betrayal. I took another sip of whiskey, letting the burn settle deep in my chest. She had made her choices. Now she had to live with them. But I wasn't done yet. The man she had chosen over me, the one who had been lurking in the background of my life, taking what wasn't his, he still had no idea what was coming. I wasn't the type to let things go. So I called Jake. I told him I wanted everything, who Eric Dawson really was, what skeletons he had in his closet, what weaknesses he had failed to keep hidden. Jake didn't ask questions. He just got to work. The next few days were a blur. I barely slept. I barely ate. I focused on one thing, digging into the life of the man who had wrecked mine. And then we found it. It wasn't just an affair. Eric had a pattern. 3 different women over the past 5 years. All of them married. All of them left their husbands for him. And in every case, he moved on as soon as the thrill of the chase was over. One of them, a woman named Claire, had lost everything. Her marriage, her home, her savings. Eric had convinced her to invest in a business opportunity. She never saw a cent of it again. I stared at the screen, reading through the messages and reports Jake had pulled together. This wasn't just some guy who had fallen for my wife. This was a man who made a habit of taking what wasn't his and leaving wreckage behind. And Maggie was next in line. I could have let it go. I could have walked away, knowing that eventually, she'd realize what a mistake she had made. But I wasn't feeling generous. So I made a call. Claire picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was cautious at first, but when I explained who I was and what I wanted, she agreed to meet. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, both of us carrying the weight of what this man had done. She told me everything. The charm, the manipulation, the way he made her feel special until he didn't. The moment she was fully his, he lost interest. And then came the financial ruin. I asked if she was willing to share what she had. Documents, messages, anything that could prove what kind of man he really was. She hesitated, then nodded. By the time we left, I had everything I needed. Now it was just a matter of timing. Eric had taken from me. Now it was my turn. Patience was never my strong suit, but revenge demanded it. Over the next few days, I gathered everything: documents, messages, financial records. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture. Eric Dawson was a predator, and Maggie was just his latest target. I thought about sending it all to her in a single message, letting her see the man she had thrown her life away for. But that wasn't enough. Letting her figure it out in private wouldn't be satisfying. She had chosen to betray me in secret. I wanted the truth to hit her in public. So I waited. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week after she left, I found out where they'd be. One of those pretentious business networking events, the kind of place where men like Eric thrived. It didn't take much effort to get inside. People assumed you belonged if you acted like you did. From across the room, I spotted them. Maggie, standing beside him, smiling in that way she used to smile at me. Eric, confident as ever, his hand on her lower back, already convinced he had one. They looked like a couple. Perfect, polished pair. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I didn't make a scene. I didn't need to. I simply walked up to them, handed Maggie the folder with everything I had collected, and watched the color drain from her face as she flipped through the pages. Her hands trembled as she read the messages, the bank statements, the names of the other women. Eric frowned, reaching for the folder, but I pulled it back before he could touch it. He didn't look so confident anymore. I kept my voice even, controlled. No need to shout. He's a liar, Maggie. A thief. This is what he does. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I saw doubt in her eyes. She whispered his name, but he didn't answer. Because he knew. He knew there was nothing he could say to undo this. I turned to walk away, but before I did, I leaned in close enough for only him to hear. You should run while you still can. Then I left. I didn't need to see what happened next. I already knew. Maggie would confront him. He'd try to charm his way out of it, maybe even convince her to stay a little longer. But eventually, she'd realize what I already knew. She wasn't special. She was just next in line. By the time I got home, I felt lighter. Not happy, not yet, but lighter. The past few months had taken everything from me. Trust, love, certainty. But they had also given me something in return. Clarity. Maggie's betrayal no longer defined me. Eric's existence no longer mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. A week later, I packed my bags. I didn't need the reminders, the old photos, the weight of what had been. The house was just a house. The city was just another place. It was time to start over. As I drove down the highway, leaving everything behind, I caught one last glimpse of the skyline in my rearview mirror. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel loss. I just felt ready. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to whatever came next.